Start with a roll call, starting.
Pertini.
Mike Bill.
Spock, secretary.
Audience.
Sorry, Catherine Gibson, citizen.
And Sarah Racine. So I think everything on our normal agenda is going to come after the presentation. So with that, thank you for coming.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Alrighty, so today I'm here on behalf of the Water Resources Board, hopefully to provide lots of info. So I'll just give a brief introduction about myself. My background is in mathematics from UC Riverside out in California. I got my master's in environmental science and management at URI. And I have experience as an analytical chemist working with contaminants regulated by the EPA. I also have done some remote sensing research at the EPA using satellite imagery to monitor water quality in the larger water bodies of Rhode Island and in the Great Lakes. And currently I am the Programming Services Officer at the Water Resources Board, where my focus is in hydrology projects, environmental data analysis, and natural resource management, land and water. All right, so after today's presentation, my goal is to have you guys understand what the Water Resources Board is, what we do, and on behalf of the Department of Health, give some information on how to create a public water system, including the different types that people apply for or entities apply for. And I'll conclude with some resources. And by the end of that, hopefully you all can understand the process of creating a water system and what agencies you all or the entity would be collaborating with, and the types of resources with the agencies. So to give a little bit more of that overview, WRB, Water Resources Board history, a little overview, the water supply management plan for the water suppliers. I go into detail. We track long-term hydrological drought. We also collect water use data that is statewide on a monthly basis, and we protect the Big River Management Area, which I'm sure several of you are aware of, and I'll talk about some of our efforts. Now, in terms of our sister agency, the Department of Health, I'll go over what a public water system is defined as, the types of public water systems, the regulatory requirements, and the pre-application processes, as well as once that water system is created, sort of what the maintenance looks like. And as I said, I'm going to conclude with some resources, financial resources, including the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund Program, the South County Groundwater Protection Acquisition Program, and some other Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank resources. So a quick history, the Water Resources Coordinating Board was created in 1964, and it was created to acquire and create the Big River Reservoir. Then it used to be part of DEM, and it had its own fiscal entity. In '97, it took on the responsibility of overseeing water use for large water suppliers, hence the creation of water supply system management plans. And then in 2001, it created a drought steering committee that tracks long-term hydrological drought. And since 2011, we've been a part of Department of Administration. So we became independent of DEM and then got absorbed by DOA, which is under the Division of Statewide Planning. So our mission is to develop, utilize, and conserve our water resources and ensure that there's sufficient supply now and in the future. And so I'm sure all of you guys know all of these sister agencies that we deal with in terms of managing water, DEM permitting, Department of Health, water quality. Ourselves, we look at water use, and we also collaborate with Emergency Management Agency and CRMC. Now, a quick getting into Department of Statewide Planning. The Water Resources Board works along with transportation team, a land use team, and a community coordination team that works with towns. And also the head of RIGIS. We work a lot with interchanging data with that. So one of our main responsibilities, as I mentioned, is water supply system management plans. We have 26 water suppliers that meet the threshold of producing more than 50 million gallons of water a year. So that is the trigger for water suppliers to create one of these plans. And Tiverton, I believe, just exceeded this quantity, so it'll be their first time creating one. And basically, this plan lays out system description, water use data, supply and demand management, emergency management, drought management, financial management, and future plans. So very large, comprehensive plans that we oversee. And executive summaries of these plans are available on our website if you all are interested. Kind of removes a lot of the data that is more secure and provides enough data to the public to know how the systems work and what they rely on. So here's a map where you can see all of the large water suppliers, and it's broken down by whether they own their own supply or source, whether it's a combination of owning their own and buying wholesale, and then public water suppliers that purchase on a wholesale level. And as you can see, managing your own source, there's only about 10 of them. So the rest either buy or share buying and managing their own source. And as you can see, they're all along the coastlines, meaning that everybody outside of these areas are on private wells. So that's about, I want to say, 40% of the state relies on that. And so when we do these water supply system management plans, we work along with WIDO and DEM to give us input on things like safe yield, how they're managing their sources, things like that. Now, for tracking long-term hydrological drought, the Water Resources Board has a drought monitoring dashboard that we update once a month, and a report also goes out. Now, this goes off of a plan, Water 2030, which is made to properly manage all of the supplies, water supplies in the state. And they created a drought criteria that has different phases from advisory to warning to danger. And so we follow this. And so this dashboard was created to look at monthly precipitation over 121 sites across the state. We have stream flow gauges, 21 across the state. This is an example of what the groundwater dashboard portion of it. As you can see, there's different parts. We have 27 wells for groundwater across the state that also used for drought, and they're all publicly available also. So consultants, planners use this type of data as well. It's provided free by the USGS, and we break this up by drought regions. There's a northern, central, and southern portions. And so when these hydrological triggers for drought are hit, convene a drought steering committee, which gives recommendations to the governors. We can have a hearing on drought. And so we haven't met, but we'll most likely meet soon.
How often does that happen? Just out of curiosity.
Probably once a year, these drought markers are triggered. I would say with shifting climate patterns, we are going to have to go back to the drawing board because long-term drought looks different. It's a lot more flashy, as you guys know. We might get more rain, but it's over shorter spans of time, more intense rain events with large periods in between of so it's looking very different, but we do use for all this data, we calculate normals over the past 30 years and understand what to expect for climate and when it's low or high. So yeah, so we also, in partner with URI, created a water use needs data and reporting database. So once again, you can see here, in addition to large water suppliers, we have wellhead protection areas, which basically define all the small community water supplies that produce less than 50 million gallons of water. So you can see they're scattered out in the areas with private wells, which makes sense. And so we accumulate data from water suppliers on a yearly basis that breaks it down monthly. And we do it by watershed. So it breaks it down into hydrological unit codes from 8 to 12. And so you can look at each watershed and see how much large water suppliers are using in that watershed, as well as estimating the small water suppliers that are using. And so if you click on any of these watersheds, you can also look at it by type of use. You can see from back to 2014 to 2024 currently. And so you can see the type of water use, the seasonality, and the general trend is we are using less water in Rhode Island as the years go by, but in the summer we're using more. So overall yearly less, but seasonally more.
A reason for that?
A reason, I would say conservation practices are pretty effective in summer because that's just the high use time. Tourism, if we get less rain, more people are out. If there's less rain, more people on the water. So seasonality, that's why that happens.
How are the wells factored into the data?
The wells are not factored into this data. What's factored is we collect annual reports from large water suppliers. So they give us monthly use that we incorporate here. The well data is more for the actual drought.
And for the drought, is it mostly looking to surface water and, or is it groundwater as well?
We look at precip, we look at streams and groundwater. So we have a whole climate network of stream gauges and groundwater gauges.
Okay.
Yeah, and so some of them are updated every 15 minutes, while some of them get updated once a month.
Sorry, are you seeing those responses changing with precipitation patterns in terms of like
Oh, definitely.
recharge and stream flow responses to precipitation?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have a group, myself, a climatologist at the Boston National Weather Service, and one of the climatologists at DEM. I'm not sure if you all are familiar with the National Drought Monitor, but it's basically a national-wide dashboard where stakeholders basically give input to this group, and they create a drought map for the whole nation. And so this small group that I'm a part of, we provide weekly input on behalf of Rhode Island. We use the stream gauge, groundwater, and precip data on a weekly basis for them to change that map. Since we're tracking long-term, that's another opportunity for us to provide a weekly update. So Climate Office at DEM does post those weekly kind of results on their website.
So I'm trying to fit this into my brain, but How do you get information from communities that don't have large water systems or water? I mean, like, we are all on wells in this town, and you said 40% of the state in that situation. Do you get any data or information?
Yeah, so we, like I said, we don't oversee those communities. That's Department of Health. They're the ones who permit these small water communities and they create these water protection areas. So they do surveys. Um, we work with the water suppliers. They know the surrounding folks' conditions, so they'll tell us, their wells are going dry. So we use that input. We do our drought monitoring and input like that. Um, and so Department of Health works with those folks, and they have also funds for things like that.
The Department of Health would work with this town.
Correct.
And I hate to keep hammering the same drum, but just so I have it kind of clear in my head, because we have so many community wells,
Mhm.
especially with more summer occupants down here.
Yeah.
So say there's a community well, it services like 12 houses. It's supposed to be registered with the Department of Health. No,
No, so I'll go into the criteria.
okay, you can talk
Yeah,
about.
and that one, to answer your question, currently it's 15 service lines is the minimum requirement. Once you're past that, then you need to create or go to Department of Health
Okay.
and register with them. So I believe has to be more than 60 days a year for service.
Okay.
Yeah.
And none of those smaller community wells, like say for argument's sake, 15 or more service lines to one well, don't have any reporting requirement to you guys,
Not
correct?
to us. Yeah. Unless that community exceeds 50 revenues a year. Yeah. Alrighty, so. So as you all know, we purchased the Big River Management Area. And in the 80s and 90s, they were about 80% done with plans and permitting when they got shut down by the EPA. They said that the creation of the reservoir did not outweigh the environmental impacts and that there was no need for that type of redundancy because they couldn't justify it with drought. So we have been responsible for being stewards of this property that's been designated as open space by the state until the reservoir is built. So we are currently in the process of finalizing a property management plan that responsibly stewards this land with the goal of creating a reservoir in the near future. So there's going to be a rebranding. There's going to be a lot more community education on the space that has not existed. And we're doing so in partner with USGS, RIDO, the towns and such to do so. It's extremely expensive, time consuming, but we are slowly chipping away at it as land to be a water source for Rhode Island now more than ever, I would say. So, yeah,
I can't tell on the map. Is that
Greenwich.
West Greenwich? Okay.
Yeah, it's West Greenwich, Exeter and Coventry.
There's still a plan then to put a reservoir in there.
Yes,
VA said.
yeah, so currently the Water Resource Board gets capital funding to fix roads, bridges, culverts, and so that has been happening. But it has not had the resources to create a reservoir. But recently we have gotten additional funding from the state. And so we're looking into modernizing it. Look at new safe yields and capacities, and hopefully work with one of the neighboring suppliers who provides water to Quonset, and hopefully we'll expand to North Kingstown, and other places in the area, and the redundant water source, hopefully get also private well owners
guys preparing that plan in-house?
Yes. With EA Engineering, that was the one question I had for collaborating with you all for some projects in here.
So is the idea that when you think the criteria is met where the EPA would then say, yes, you can create the reservoir is when you move towards that?
Yeah, so phase one is modernizing how much water we could actually get out of here and doing water quality testing in the rivers and in groundwater. Currently, if we were to just use the groundwater, it would not be enough. And because of the 80s and 90s results, Providence Water deems it not enough to be a source for them. So it is Kent County, which is just over 95. So, working closely with them, as they're also growing, and they're I would say, leads in PFAS treatment and things like that. So, yeah, exciting stuff coming here in the future. All right. So now moving on to the writing portion of this presentation, and I apologize ahead of time if I can't answer questions as well for this part, but if you all do have questions, it would be greatly appreciated if you guys can write them down. My collaborators at Rido, I told them that I would give them any questions that you all had and pass it over and then reach back, and they were also happy to come to do secondary presentation for you. So this portion of the presentation is to understand the requirements for creating a drinking water system before leasing or purchasing a property. All right, so public water system, it's a lot of jargon here. But it basically means a system for the provisions of the public for human water consumption. All right, and so a system that has at least 15 service connections or regularly serves at least 25 individuals, at least 60 days out of the year. So that is what we consider a public water supply. Now, what this just means is that includes whether they buy a source or they don't, or they manage their own. For example, if you all were to buy from another water supplier and then just store it and treat it yourselves, that would count. Or if you created your own, basically what this is. Now, for the types of water systems, there are three. So a public water system that serves at least 15 service connections used by residents year-round, or serves at least 25 residents year-round. So service connections or and non-transient community is a public water system that supplies to at least 25 of the same people at least 6 months a year. So schools, office buildings, let's say apartment complexes, and transient non-community water systems. This is like businesses, basically. Now, for public water systems, there is, like I said, you could either buy from a public water system, an existing one, or you might have an on-site well. So if you're going to have an on-site well, you definitely have to go through a license through Rido. And for a business that does not have Rido, they would have to get one if they were doing any type of food preparation, or there was some type of drinking water for humans that was at least 25 people on a daily for 60 days out of the year. And once again, it's a business that's serving 15 service connections. They need to have a Rido license. Now, when you create a drinking water system, not usually common knowledge that you also have to create a wastewater treatment system. So they go hand in hand. Rido is who does the drinking water system, and then DEM is who does the wastewater treatment. I'm not very familiar with this part, but basically, if your business buys from a public water system, they have to have proof um, of that connection from the public water supplier. And if you have an on-site well, that you're using groundwater, you have to have a license, and if not, this is saying you have to get licensed. Or once again, if you're gonna have 25 people, 15 service connections, or if there's any type of food prep or drinking water. And so if you'll want to learn about wastewater, I'm sure Item will be happy to talk about that. So when applying for a water system, the things that you will all have to consider is, if it's just going to be serving residents, or if it's also going to be available to businesses or commercial areas. A number, if it is for businesses, then you have to explain, what the type of business is and what the density of customers is going to look like. And let's see. And if it's a business, also understanding the difference of water use based off of the type of businesses. In this case, what you all have to, I would say, get from this is if you have a groundwater source, there's going to be a wellhead protection area in 200 feet radius. And so usually that radius has to be clear of houses, roads, anything that's going to interfere with water quality. So if it's not a clear area, there's going to have to be a lot more hurdles. And looking outside of the 200 feet is a 1750 feet radius to understand the adjacent land to that wellhead protection area. So those things will have to be considered in the application and either studied depending on what is there, maybe additional groundwater sampling, things like that. And before even applying, Department of Health wants people to meet with them to discuss, these regulatory processes, to save time also for the application.
Question, given like the aquifer characteristics here, how big of an issue is contamination from the surface? Like from, for example, people putting out fertilizers or, treating their lawn for mosquitoes and things like that.
Yeah, in this area, I would say things like nitrates and nitrites would be a big issue. It seems like historically there have been issues with pollution here. And what's the other thing? Yeah, due to the fact that there is no central wastewater facility and there's septic tanks, that always causes or it's really common to cause bacteria, other type of chemical contamination.
Is there like a certain, sorry, I'm I'm a hydrologist, full disclosure. Is there a certain like depth of the well where it's like better off, or is it, like what's the transport
You
here?
would only know once you were there.
Yeah.
Because as you know, the soils in Rhode Island change significantly. And with that moraine, south of that moraine is also very different than, so it all depends on the area. You have to look at the soil, and most likely if it's most likely the contaminations are shallower, my experience. So, if there is, you just dig deeper, and if there's water there, then you're good. But part of the requirements, does require tons of testing for bacteria and nitrates and nitrites like that. So, and that due diligence would have to be done even before creating a supply.
So given the real estate of where Charlestown is, back to those 40% well water people, do we not have the infrastructure, or the land, or some of the definitions, if you will, even to create a public water supply in that area, that dense area that we see on the
The
map?
Water Resources Board actually purchased land back in like 2012, 2013, somewhere around there, south of Route 1.
Right.
Not far from Genwood Drive, over in that area, to be set aside, so should the town ever need a public water supply in the future, Water Resources Board preserved that land for the town, so there is a possible water source if ever needed.
Water source, and then therefore a wastewater management system to be built somewhere in the area?
All that was done was the land was purchased and set aside. There were no additional steps, at least to the best of my knowledge, taken beyond that.
And is there a benefit to even going down that road at this point, or is it just not? It's fine. The answer to that. Thank
Just coming
you.
right up. So a quick example of what they would look like in the application. So let's say, for example, if this was going to be the wellhead, there would be a 200-foot radius. And so, for example, this is what it would look like if you had issues or concerns. So you would be next to a road. You would have impervious surface, so you know it's unlikely to get runoff and so be influenced by the adjacent land. And you also have buildings, which, you know, people produce waste. You have more traffic in the area and things like that. So logical things to consider when choosing the area of the wellhead. So, for example, an area like this, you know, would be less of an issue to get certified since it's far away from a road, so you have less influence. The property is also off of the 200-foot radius, so if they have any septic tanks, at least it's not within it. And there's no trails or anything for people and traffic to be going through. So that would be like a pretty good example of a wellhead area. And
Hector, I hate to want to interrupt you and expect you to have the answer to everything. But the previous slide.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just, because I was in a unique situation where I live in a very underdeveloped area.
Yeah.
And like, that could almost be the aerial photo of the one business in the neighborhood that had a wellhead protection, which maybe one, had maybe more than 25 employees, and that's why it had to be like a new. But I always wondered if that meant, if that radius goes off their property and a butter who has like an undeveloped piece of property, would that potentially cause that person to not ever be able to build their house there if the radius took up most of that person's property kind of situation? Like, meaning like, you should really do your due diligence in buying to know, because I think I was there forever and a day. I didn't know there was a wellhead protection area there. I just happened to stumble across it in some documentation somewhere. So is that a possibility? And if so, like, does that happen?
yeah, that's a great question. So basically, one of the things I'll be talking about that one of the resources went towards was securing 2 wells on Block Island. So we all know Block Island, very highly coveted land. The water supplier there was able to buy a property. And when they were buying it, they were working with Water Resources Board and Rido. And so when they found this property, it was pretty much the only property for sale. And they made an exception because the property also had I don't know, maybe like 5 residents around it. So they proved that it was impossible to find a property that would meet those standards at the time, especially with they really needed redundancy for their water supply. So in this case, there was an exception as the properties around that area are so large. But I think if there were to be some type of, let's say, subdivision of those properties, during the permitting process, they would most likely find that it's a wellhead protected area. And so there might be limitations to what they could do in the corner of their property where that is. I'm assuming. I believe they have pretty strict easement rights, but I can really tell people what to do.
And I would imagine at the time of institution of the wellhead protection area, any of the affected butters would be notified as part of the process, so they would become aware that this is going to become a limitation on your property.
Yeah. Yeah, and most of them respect that and they want more water, so they're happy to. They want. Yeah. So here's an example of a 1750-foot radius, just considering, for example, if this was the wellhead protection, you just have to be cautious. You know, if there's an automotive repair shop, you're most likely gonna have to be really worried about oils and gases and things like that seeping into the ground. And you know, when it rains, that stuff can be transmissible depending on the type of soil. So that's just another example of what you would be looking at if you were to choose a property, the type of due diligence you would have to do on it. All right, so this just reiterates the process of, let's see. Yeah, working with staff at RIDO for pre-application consideration and assistance. They work with people so that they don't waste their time doing the application before knowing their requirements and what they have to look into. So before going to resources, the last thing is once you have a public water system, the type of things that you'd have to do in order to maintain it. As I mentioned before, so you have to do sampling to see what is there, if there is any type of contaminant that you can disinfect, whether it's like chlorine. You establish that. In terms of where you can get sampled, you can either go to certified labs in Rhode Island or RIDO has their own lab as well. And so chloroform sampling is really important, especially when you have septic systems nearby. And you'd have to do well sampling once a year and once every 3 years, for nitrates and once every 3 years for nitrites. And you do sanitary survey every 5 years by RIDO, and public drinking water regulations are constantly changing, whether new lead laws, new emerging contaminants, so you would have to just get guidance with that. And let's see. All of your sampling and things would have to be reported to RIDO, as long as you were producing less than 15 million gallons a year. So I have 3 resources for you all today if you were interested in moving forward with creating a public water supply. Them being the Rhode Island State Revolving Fund, that's driven by Department of Health, backed by the Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank. The Rhode Island Water Resources Board has a South County Groundwater Protection and Acquisition Program. And I'll just go over some of the other Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank water infrastructure program. So for the State Revolving Loan Fund, this fund is part loan at low interest, and there are also ways to get part of the loan forgiven. So that is with Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank, but who can apply is community public water systems, nonprofit, non-community public water systems, and any local government, so towns. And so this is 25% below market interest rates. The principal forgiveness for public water systems, especially disadvantaged areas, and they give a 20-year payback period. And so some projects that have been used recently is for treatment of PFAS, pipe installation replacement for lead service lines, and more water protection, whether that's easements or property administration. So for the South County Groundwater Protection and Acquisition Program, this is run by the Water Resources Board. It's specifically made for Washington County to purchase wellhead or land for surrounding wellhead areas and to be used for future public water systems that are groundwater. Currently, we have about $1 million remaining in this fund. And in order to take advantage of this, the entity would have to enter a ground lease agreement with the state because the state would purchase the property and be the landowner, and WRB would lease it to the applicant. And the applicant must also certify that the well will be installed and active within 10 years. So that's some of the general stipulations, and that there are funds, appropriate funds ready to be committed to the project. So Block Island was the last water supplier, like I said, that took advantage of this program. They used some of these funds to acquire that property and develop wells on the property as well. So we now have 2 additional wells to add to their pre-existing. They were having people go dry in the last few years, including a lot of the area near the port.
So on Block Island, there are private wells that still exist on Block Island, or is
Plenty.
Pardon?
Plenty, yeah, the water,
This is basically a resource if needed.
yes, this water supply manages, or they serve about the southern half of.
That you showed with the radius, the 1750 and the 100. How does that work with coastal and just coastal communities, like distance from salt water, and water? How does coastal water, salt water factor into public water supply?
Sure,
Just to be clear.
it's all really dependent on the well itself.
Huh.
For example, the wells on Block Island are tidally influenced. And so they pull in brackish water, so they use reverse osmosis to remove a lot of that. And so it really just depends on the water quality in that area. It might not have any effect if it's not tidally influenced. So there might be some separation by the soil, or it might be deep enough where it doesn't matter. It all really just depends. So if, let's say you all moved forward with the process, and let's say you all decided to use that property in Charlestown that the Water Resources Board owns. My understanding is that the property was bought with an old hotel that wasn't going to operate anymore. So the Water Resource Board purchased that land, but before doing so, they did hydrological studies and water quality studies, preliminary ones. And so they saw that, I believe, I'm not remembering the numbers, but I want to say close to 200,000 gallons per day that it produced, if I remember the report correctly.
I know it's a lot.
And
It was good too.
And so the Water Resource Board paid for the structure to be removed and to restore the area. And so there's currently easements where that property can only be used for supply. So if you all were interested, let's say in using this fund, I believe it's available for the next 12 months before it goes back to the state, if it goes unused. And so the town would have to basically go into a ground and like a use agreement with the Water Resources Board. Water Resources Board would still stay as the owner and would lease it to the town for almost nothing, I'm sure, in terms of what it would cost the town. And so the Water Resources Board would assist in updating those preliminary hydrological studies to update the safe yield, water quality that's consistent with Department of Health, state guidelines, and EPA. And in parallel, the town would have to work with Department of Health for the permitting aspect. Now, with that, they would have to create a new water district. So that would be a legislative process. That would happen collaboratively. And I've never done that myself, so I'm not sure what that looks like, but I'm sure we would figure it out. It's all in legislature.
And that's easy.
But yeah, so there would have to be a water district created for it. There would have to be the right-of applications for a public water system, so the town wouldn't then have to become an operator of the water system. And then it would be about making a plan. Like I said, is it going to be for residents? Is it going to be for businesses? And what the reach based off of the water availability would be. And then how would you all fund treatment, the storage, and the service lines? So those would be the things to consider for public water supply.
Two questions before.
Really doesn't go very far.
So, in light of that comment, is this South County Groundwater Protection and Acquisition Program sunsetting, meaning like the $1 million you said it's gonna go back to the state?
Yep.
All right, so this is not like an in perpetuity program that we can count on being there 6 years from now.
Yeah, I think it has rounds. I think it started with about 3 million. And so we did a couple projects with water suppliers, and so there's 1 million left. I don't remember when it would pop back up again, but I can get back to you guys on that.
And the second question related to that was, and it may be because since we had this conversation, you've done a bit more research, but I remember you mentioning something to me about extending the existing South Kingstown public water supply line to combine with the groundwater wells in Charlestown that you were just talking about. So would that be like and I'm thinking like with my Deb hat on right now, like, well, we'd have to create a water district and we have to be responsible for all this stuff. Am I interpreting this right, that like potentially the town of Charlestown could engage with the existing public water supply in South Kingstown? And have them be the water supplier for parts of Charlestown and utilizing that property and well that we helped to purchase to lessen the cost on the town? Or is it because it's in Charlestown, it would have to become its own water district?
So I think, let's see, I'll try to answer your question the best I can. So let me give you the example of Pasco and Harrisville. So I haven't updated this, but Harrisville and Pasco merged this year. They became the Clear Water District. So their utilities and water combined. I want to say Harrisville was having capacity issues, so they made an agreement with Pasco to combine and share their water source. So that was on their own doing. So technically there's nothing stopping from the town of Charlestown, like how the Rideau public water system regulations are set up. Be a public water system by just buying water from somebody else. So you guys, if South Kingstown and Charlestown made a deal saying, could you sell us water? There's nothing stopping that other than, do they have enough water to sell? And then that begs the question, who's going to pay for the infrastructure to get the water from the town to you guys? And then that means if you don't have your own source, then you have to buy it and store it. So then you guys would be operators of a water tank or tower that you guys buy wholesale from South County, for example. So that is an option that the town sure can see through if they think that's a good idea, or talks with South County or South Kingstown if that is what you guys want to do. stopping you guys from asking and
So the
elaborating.
cost, the cost within getting the lines, the infrastructure, towers, distribution, the maintenance, all of which is not currently in any town budget. Have it. Is there value add to that in the long run? I mean, is that for the 40% wells or water obviously that's purchased privately? Like, is there value add to a community to spend all that? And I have no idea how much it costs to even. What is this, a $10 million project? Is it?
I think it's probably more than that.
Okay, so, I mean,
How far your lines are gonna go.
I mean, it's
community
really,
standpoint,
I mean, I don't think there's any one question, I mean, one answer for that
yeah,
question.
I'm just,
I mean, if you have wells running out,
yeah,
I mean, people can only either dig deeper or try to find if their property's large enough, try to drill another well. But it's still the same aquifer. Right. There's, same watershed, so,
yeah.
I mean, it's unfortunate. It's something that, and all the communities outside of these large water supply or service areas are experiencing.
Yeah.
And especially with these flash drought events, it's getting worse. So, this is a really tough topic, I think, to
Yeah,
talk
no,
about.
it's very to learn.
Agreed.
Interesting, yeah.
Agreed, yeah. And so that brings me to the last slide, which is the Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank, the different water infrastructure programs that they have. So we spoke about the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund from RIDO. RIDOM has a similar fund, and that's for Clean Water State Revolving Fund. That's for their wastewater, stormwater mitigation. Then there's community septic system loans, which I think is very applicable here. But sewer tie-ins and the water quality protection charge, which is a water resources board fund that basically it's called the penny fund. So water suppliers that choose to give 3 cents for every gallon they sell goes into this big pool of money that they can use to acquire land or for physical improvement.
You said that the community septic system loan would not be appropriate here.
Oh, well, I think it's just a little bit out of the scope of what we're talking about. I'm sure
Okay.
the town could use it.
Been doing it for years. We
Right.
converted all the cesspools over. Septics, if you had a cesspool, you had to replace it. We're
Was
down
that
to one.
fund?
We have one left in the entire town, which is pretty good. And then if somebody was selling a house and they had a failed system, you get the low interest loan, help upgrade their system.
And it came from that source.
I believe
Okay.
so, yes.
Yeah, so the Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank is pretty good at, I would say, forgiving part of these loans. But I understand that it's difficult to pool a lot of resources for huge projects like this.
It's big budget.
It only takes you so far.
If you have a public water service, you have to have water treatment,
Yeah.
public level.
Yes.
This,
Bonnie has a.
Well, so, yeah, no. But they love. So like, let's go micro. Green Hill does not have sewers, but Green Hill has public water supply. So I think there must be some kind of requirement that if you're tied into the public water supply system and you have a septic system, there must be like a Rhode Island Department of Health requirement that you get your septic system inspected every so often, submit said report. Any failures is immediate like grounds for disconnection from the system, potentially or shut off until you're yada yada. Cause I can't imagine like if you don't have public sewer, then you can't have a public water supply.
Yeah, you're right.
Cause like Richmond doesn't have But they have a public water, a limited public water supply district, which would be what, I don't know if you heard what was going on in Richmond a few weeks ago with their public water supply, but that would be the cautionary tale to somebody like Deb of like, do you really want to be a water supplier? Because
That was the last water supplier that was created.
In Richmond?
Yeah.
What happened? Is there
So the very short version, they had to put one in because they had a gas station in town with failing tanks that contaminated all sorts of private residents as well. So they had to put one in, but it's a very limited system. But because it's a very limited system, it's very expensive to run for a small amount of customers. So when I heard the private company who runs the water system on behalf of the town, who's relatively new, took over for another one, and listened to the laundry list of lack of maintenance and stuff that went on, partly because who's got the money to pay for that, but just one example was I heard something about you have to have like a purge wellhead or something for your aerial tank supply thing. So you can access it and like literally purge stuff. And theirs was like buried underground and you couldn't even access it or know exactly where it was. So that's how long it'd been since the purge valve had been tested on the system. Yeah. So where I was going with the South Kingstown thing was don't want to have a water department in the town of Charlestown with more town staff and all these great expenses when potentially you could just engage with the town of South Kingstown and say, we'll buy water from you, you supply it to us. It could still potentially come from the property that's located in Charlestown. And you could have a contract with South Kingstown, who's had a water supply division for as long as I can remember. Their system mostly relies on what used to be United Water up near URI or whatever. But this might be an occasion for them to say, whoa, we have another source of water if we're interconnected with South Kingstown, so we're not reliant on that one supply of water.
There's an avenue that you guys can explore.
I think the big challenge that we've heard is mostly coastal residents on these community wells who are allowed to essentially withdraw at will 365. And our well is going dry because their supplier, in that community system doesn't have metering at the houses, doesn't impose water bans or anything like that. And they're looking to the town for like, we're running out of water. Well, one, because you're irresponsibly using it, but two, if you could say salt intrusion has now caused their existing well to become unusable, then it could come to the level where the town would have to like do something about it. But I would argue the point is we kind of have talked over time that like, until you can prove to us that you're responsibly using that supply, I don't think the town would even engage in a conversation about how the town could come in and help it. My personal opinion is we should tell them, good, you own your water supply and it's failing, go find yourself a new one.
Managers better.
Yeah. And that's why I'm not doing Deb's job, because she's not allowed to say something.
So that brings me to one of the questions I had for you is, like, one, what are demand management or, non-revenue water management, like, requirements that you have? Like, are there any standard policies across these systems? And the other one is, what have you seen as being successful? I was thinking about a town like Charlestown where we have individual like wells, what have you seen work in the state for maybe getting people to be responsible during a drought and things like that?
Especially with wells, because people can't, you just don't think about how much they're using.
I mean, I've only been working at the Water Resource Board for about a year and a half. And I think part of that comes with education about water availability, understanding that it's a limited source. I think that's where it starts. In terms of success, like I said, I'm from California, and then the water practices there are just a little different in terms of water recharge is a priority.
Yeah.
Where the water goes, in storm drains, is more strategic. I would say here, I don't think there is, I haven't seen the level of coordination from Department of Transportation, considering water availability or water recharge in their projects. Those are the kinds of things that I've seen currently talked about, because we're getting the water when we don't need it. If that makes sense. We're not getting water in the times that we need recharge, and when we do, we don't have the best systems for storage or recharge. Hence, our reservoirs with our help, will be better for this long-term drought thing. There is more now than ever, but that's the unfortunate thing about private wells is that one, if you're on Jamestown, you're on Bedrock, or you're out here, and it just varies so much, it's hard to control. And one thing I've also seen is like if pollution is the problem, that's like a whole nother thing. So it's just about redundancy. I mean, even if you all went ahead with the property that WRB owns, like I said, you have to also estimate the reach of that. You might need another property on the other side of town that does the western end, it just depends.
I have a bunch of them.
He has to come see me every third Thursday of the month. Anytime I want.
I'm sorry. So another question I was gonna ask is, what have you seen in terms of trends on the threat side in Rhode Island for water supply, and where does climate come into that balance? So, is climate not as big of an issue as, say, PFAS and emerging contaminants? Or is it a bigger issue? Like, what are you seeing as like the trends and the big things to be aware of?
I've seen PFAS become an issue in places like Burville, Smithfield area, anywhere where you have old firefighting stations. They use a lot of fire foam, fire suppressive foam, tons of PFAS. Areas with schools, a lot of the building materials pre-80s had a lot of PCBs, lead. So kind of older contaminants are an issue, places where there's old structures. PFAS, like I said, fire foam. You're seeing a lot over here.
A big problem here in Charlestown in Arnold, it's emerging. So it's right next to Nineveh Park, the old Naval Air Station, and so it's
Yes,
blowing in that direction, and
yes.
Army Corps of Engineers has been down actively working filtration systems.
Yes, anywhere near military areas, highly contaminated. I would say,
Textile, right?
yeah, textile mills and things like that. I would say they're equal in terms of how negatively they impact water. Because on one hand, you have drought that since about 2014 has become more consistent. Before that, you used to have a dry year, wet year, dry year, wet year is what the trends look like in Rhode Island. And so you would have really wet years in some of those, like every other year instance. And now you're finding flash droughts that are happening earlier in the year, or sorry, they're lasting longer in terms of the summers are getting longer. So you have more use and you have getting warmer earlier and staying warmer later. And so, which means use is going up and have less rain, which means that when rain does get here, the ground is usually too dry for it to absorb into the groundwater as quickly as it normally would if it was a little more saturated. And then the deluges of rain, the ground can only absorb so much before it becomes runoff. So it's not very productive for the groundwater wells in that case. I know they're moving towards more storage tanks, for example, because that's one way to keep water around longer. Problem is that you need to be able to use it to flush it out, because if you store it, then it also grows bacteria. So having like some type of water tank seems to be beneficial. I know Newport has increased their size. Block Island is increasing their size. Jamestown is finding themselves in a pickle in terms of finding more water. Their sources are dwindling in terms of quality, so they're having a hard time keeping up. Same thing, money issues to invest in their infrastructure is really difficult. So even people with supplies are having a really hard time. They're not one of the larger ones like Providence or Kentucky.
What about on the infiltration side? I mean, you were saying that there hasn't been a lot of talk of that. Do you see there being more opportunities for, say, integrating that into like transportation infrastructure projects and making sure that you're getting more recharge even with the flashy?
I think that's something my department's gonna have to start to advocate to Department of Transportation. Um,
Just thinking,
Unfortunately,
especially in the coastal areas.
as you guys know, the types of funding available is tied to the administration. So things like resilience, either you have to rebrand or it's more about economic growth. What for you guys know. But yeah, I think that's an initiative that east of the Mississippi, they need to get stronger on because east of the Mississippi we rely a lot more on groundwater and surface water, which I think has made us feel like we have a lot. So it was going to be more for storage and recharge, which I don't think is something that we're used to thinking.
This might be a dumb question, but lack of fire hydrants in our town is directly related to a lack of water system.
Yeah, fire hydrant. You don't
So
have-
there's no plan, that'll all be fire safety.
Huge infrastructure administration.
Okay.
No, I have another dumb question. So you were born and raised in California? What's your,
Question.
it's a loaded question. Only Hector's
You
opinion.
don't have to answer this
Does
second.
it reflect necessarily the interests or beliefs of the Rhode Island Water Resources Board? Is it like disgusting how we waste water and like, did you guys have water problems in California going back long enough that like you grew up going like, holy shit, I can't believe they do that stuff here on the East Coast? Or did that kind of come later in your time in California, the water crisis?
I think it's both ends with the lack of education on water. In where I grew up, it's a desert, but yeah, it's a desert and water their lawns every day, even if it's 100 degrees.
Right.
Water evaporating and not going back into the wastewater management system or whatever. So I think people here are just used to seeing things so green and they see the rain and I just don't think they think about water until their tap run.
Right.
So I think it's equally there's a lack of water education. And here, I just think the patterns have changed so drastically in the last 10 years that infrastructure is not keeping up with the demand and the weather is just exacerbating, especially in coastal areas. As you guys are aware, it's where tourists come and summer use gets the highest. So there's a higher demand in these areas. And I think people think there's more resources in these areas, but that's not necessarily the case sometimes. But yeah, water is definitely getting scarce for the state.
So on the political end, it's an education for all you guys, because like I'm still having a hard time understanding, I'm that old now. Hector's younger than I am. I always think of Hector being older than me because he knows a lot more than me. But 15 years ago, there was this coalition for water security in Rhode Island. They got formed as like a task force to go like, how do we stop wasting so much water? Because so many people in the state pull 40% pull water from the ground in the yard, and there's no way to regulate how much water they pull out of the ground. And one of the recommendations that came out of it 15 years ago was everybody in the state who has a well should have a meter. And the Water Resources Board, some other entity in Rhode Island, has access to. And you're given an astronomically high water budget. Like you're a 4-bedroom house, well, you can consume enough water as though like 20 people live in your house. And as soon as you pass that threshold, we're gonna charge you. And it was summarily rejected before any outside conversation, because like if you think the Rhode Island legislature is gonna pass anything like that, you're out of your minds, but that's the rock we're pushing up a hill when it comes to water quantity and availability in Rhode Island is if the political side of things doesn't have the will and the might to push that rock up the hill, we're just all waiting for the crisis. And we'll see it here on the micro level with like salt intrusion in people's wells and stuff where it's like, what do I do?
Do these meters exist already?
Yeah, like the meter you have in a public water supply system, you have a meter. by the way.
Actually, homeowners could, it could be mandatory that if you, well, you have to
Yes.
have a meter.
So, yeah, but
And
like
you have to-
anecdotally, because you know me as the exaggerator, right?
Well,
When I go home tonight, if I like the sound of rain on my roof when I'm sleeping at night and I want to turn a hose on my roof all night long from my well, nobody can stop me from doing that.
We can download an app.
yeah,
I can use as much water from my private well, my property as I want for whatever purpose I see fit, and no one can tell me I can't. However, my well, I'm sharing the same water as the guy right next door to me. So what I'm doing on my property immediately affects the guy next door, but I don't know that as a dumb homeowner. It's just like, it's in my ground, it's my water, it's free, and I can have it.
Thinking this through, though, wouldn't there need to be state enabling legislation? Like, I don't think that could ever be done on a town level.
No, that was
And
the
that's the
idea with the
problem.
Rhode Island legislature will never pass anything that will enable that taking of your private property. Cause it doesn't recognize the fact that the water under your home that your well is drawing from is not yours. You don't own it because it goes past your property boundary line. So it's, in my opinion, or in a sane person's opinion, it's not a taking because you're already sharing it. It's a scientific fact. You're sharing it with all your neighbors.
It's just how to keep track of that.
but if the meters, there's two things, cause like if the state legislative would never pass that and it creates a whole new monitoring system and workload and rating systems to regulate and monitor, but if individual meters were available, so responsible people, we get 20% of the 40% actually can regulate it on them, on their own table.
Mhm.
To know, like, you better cut back this week, or there is 20 people at the house, but there's no showers every day. Like, how can people individually be more accountable on their own right? On it, I mean, do those meters exist that people, besides calling your well company to come out and test your
You could. like,
well, how do you,
like,
how would you even know that?
If
As
you
a-
wanted to know just for your own purposes, like how much water am I drawing out of my well, you can put a meter on your well and you could look at it whenever you want and it'll
But
tell.
if those meters are available for public use, is there a reason, like, is that something we should try to put out there as a, hey, be responsible, buy a meter, test your wells, like, don't go below a level, like, I don't know, is there public meters?
The reality is like your money is far better spent on just, you don't need the meter to tell you you're using too much water.
Yeah, it's
Stop.
accountability.
Doing this,
Face.
stop doing that.
I know, but.
But yeah, if you need to like see the number, I bet you any money, like we could work with URI and like get free meters installed, like on a temporary basis or something. Cause like if I'm a homeowner, I'm not paying $3,000 to buy a meter and hook it up to my.
So.
I'm just gonna stop
It
you.
doesn't tell you how much is in your well, though. It just.
How much you draw, how much you draw.
Tell you that you're getting low. It'll tell you this is how much you're using.
Like the idea, I use this as an anecdotal thing all the time. When I was growing up, I worked on a horse farm. We had a well, we had a concrete pool there that had a crack in it. So we always ran the hose in the pool for probably about an hour a day to keep it topped off. But if there was a meter on the well there saying, you've exceeded your X number of gallons per month thing, and now we're gonna send you a bill, I bet you they would have fixed the crack in the pool a long time ago. So it's that kind of like mentality of like, it's free,
Yeah.
whatever the electricity is for my pump to run to fill it, versus Big Brother is,
You're right, the legislature would never go for them here.
because they never get reelected.
Yeah, and it's just hard to have a vision for the future.
Yeah, I believe New Hampshire has one of the strictest water use regulations. They put a cap on how much you apply for a water permit. They put a cap on how much you can use. So they tell you not to exceed that. And they do a lot more reporting.
Do they have wells or all public, I mean, they do that for the,
I believe they also, they do a really good job at tracking.
that's a real commitment and that's an administrative cost.
That they're the only ones. It's kind of surprising. Like,
That's,
Yeah.
like they were on it.
we or die.
Yeah,
Right?
Yeah.
Like fucking-
Not paying any taxes on my income.
That, right, yeah.
Exactly.
All right.
And I've asked you this before and I can't remember what you told me. And the answer might have been, I don't know what the hell you're talking about, Chris. But the Pawcatuck optimization study that USGS did with the model lives where now, Michelle? Because I remember when Gardner was doing that, he was like, the only thing wrong with what wrong, not his words, in doing this is when we're done, and then they were done, was we don't have anybody to own it. Like, we want to give it to Rhode Island, to Water Resources Board, to DEM, to somebody to keep running the model, updating the model with new withdrawals from new public water supply stuff. Who freaking owns it? You guys own it? Like, does it, or did no one take ownership of it and it's just out
Does it
there?
not
and it
exist?
goes to nothing, and it's a gigantic waste of time and money to do.
Pawcatuck modeling, yeah, I think that model is around. I think someone just has to touch it. I have stacks of studies that I have to get through.
Oh, my gosh.
Where I started, just for general knowledge, there's a lot.
Yeah.
There's definitely a lot.
That was supposed to be like the brass ring for the sole source aquifer, the Wood Pawcatuck watershed, that you could say like, oh, the Narragansett Indian tribe now wants to start selling water to a power plant in Barville, and they're gonna supply them with, I'm so bad with quantities, whatever amount of gallons per day. You could run the model and see what impact that's gonna have on the surrounding wells for all the.
So it's of the aquifer, so meaning you could actually run climate scenarios with it.
Correct.
Do you guys have it?
It's somewhere, he already told you, it's somewhere.
He's gonna own it.
Water Resources Board, I'm sure it's archived somewhere. I mean,
I feel like that was back when Water Resources Board was DEM, not DOA. So I think the idea was like, oh my God, don't let DEM own this because they'll do nothing with it, they'll lose it, and it'll be a complete waste of time. So that could have happened. That's kind of where I was driving. at.
Language was it? Was it in like Fortran or something like that?
Just to summarize this, because it's
Storm
5 and,
tools.
Okay,
yeah.
I think USGS uses Storm.
okay. So it's not like a,
It was like a decade.
So it's
ago.
like, so the takeaways, today is
We're all gonna
it's down in public water supply, and we a lot about what would entail take. Is there a discussion of South Kingston and merging, Chris, like, that's a question, and is it worth it? And again, who spearheads it and the value of it all? And then 3, and for me, this is just a big takeaway. It's like, how do we communicate to the homeowners in this town just about all this? It's like, there isn't unlimited water. We do have limitations. You know, there's a drought. It's like all the time, you know, how are we measuring things? How can people be more responsible? I don't really It's like recycling, right? It's like everybody's finally trained, but how do we do it with water? I don't.
It would be really cool, like along the lines of your thing about putting a meter on your house is like, if we had like a mobile trailer with a cistern on it. And there was a way like, oh, through this generous grant program that doesn't exist, we can connect you to it for a month and park it in your yard. And so what I'm driving at here, Sally, is your neighbors who had to go from a well. Like the number of times, like, what do you mean the tank's empty?
Yeah.
We just had 15 people here for the weekend and they were all taking showers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Water
So
trucks down.
suddenly when you're like, there's no water coming out of the tap because, well, wasn't Ben just here like 5 days ago to fill this thing? Like when I feel like whacking my wife sometimes because she has to take a bath like every night. And I just look at the bathtub and I'm like, oh my God, there's like, what, 30 gallons?
I
of
just
ever
think
seen
like
there?
is there ways that we can train, that we can create more awareness, into the public eye about things that are
You know, I'm thinking about the,
on the meters.
the program, Dowling, the one where they're trying to get people on board for not using certain kinds of pesticides, et cetera, especially when you're coastal because of the way it drains. And they've been dealing with that challenge too, with how to engage the community, how
Yeah.
to like generate interest and desire to be educated. And unfortunately, we're in a time period in our country where like there's a lot of blowback going on. So it's harder to get that kind of,
Engagement.
it's important, it's really important.
I feel like on the drought side, it's a lot more tangible, right? Because
Mhm.
like
Right.
people quality thing, you know, it's like,
Yes, you're right.
but like when someone's well goes dry,
That's
they know it.
Mhm.
And I feel like that's, I mean, from it's like, it's gotta be a ground up education thing at this point, right? But I wonder if, I mean, it's just something where we can figure out potential ways to do, you know, if there's already a drought, like advisory, you know, we just adopt that for the town,
I was gonna, yeah,
revise it,
I was gonna,
right? So,
this drought monitor is updated on a weekly basis. And it's, it takes into account, like I said, we look at the weekly precipitation, the changes in stream flows and groundwater wells. And so we give a recommendation on a regional basis. So we're saying, you know, based off the trends of, oh, this looks funny. Based on the trends of precip, sometimes, for example, the last few months, the center of the state is getting all the water, for example, leaving the southern part of the state extremely dry. So it's kind of the color skewed here, but this bottom part is actually in V1. So, and like I said, this is for the whole US. So we can look at our Northeast neighbors and how they're doing. But they provide a lot of data that would be really useful. I mean, if you see the southern region suffering, it would be really beneficial if somehow there was some public notice to like preserve water, because when water suppliers, I mean, they have their own metrics, large water suppliers for their sources. Same thing if you guys can do something like on the same level of a water ban.
Yeah.
In terms of like, we recommend this based off of.
helping people to understand, because when I drive into South Kingstown, you see the water ban on the highway. But when I come to Charlestown, people will say, well, I have a well, so it doesn't count because they
So
don't see that that's still
here's
connected to
a-
the whole thing.
potential recommendation for a next step, right? You have clear categories here, right? You probably don't have to be concerned about the top couple ones, but if we could, especially if we could identify, you know, historically when we've been in some of the more severe ones and get testimonials for what has actually happened from people affected by it. And then come up with specific, what are our asks during that? You know, don't let your wife take a bath every day.
Please don't do that. Sounds so big,
Right?
Our webpage.
It's, I mean,
sounds so big brothery until you're beholden on someone to give you your water.
right.
Yeah.
They can say to you, can't use it for this purpose, they can fucking do whatever they wanna do.
Where do those messages come, like Deb in the town? Is that like, how do we monitor the drought and then?
You just go on the website.
Right, but I mean, just from
Yeah,
a town perspective, we have the water bans or if we're in a fire.
I
you
know.
know,
Yeah, we don't do water bans because, we can't.
Cause you're telling people
but
what.
you,
what the-
Can't.
but
You
just,
can't say to somebody, you can't your lawn
Right.
because it's
Right.
their private
But
way.
how do they do that in some of our surrounding?
It's public water.
Yeah, cause it's public water.
you can't ban it, so it doesn't have to be mandatory, but
Say it.
same
Re-
as
make
like the
recommendations.
fire,
Yeah.
like signs that we have up, you do
Yeah.
it for water and say,
Yeah.
hey, we're in a drought.
We recommend. I mean,
Like,
we
this
could
is what we
do that.
recommend.
Yeah. And that chart's great to see.
There are people in neighborhoods that will do their own pressuring of a neighbor that's watering. I mean, I've seen that happen.
Yeah. Especially on the smaller community wells.
Yeah.
Well, it's like, they sent out an email to all 30 of us saying, please don't water your lawn, and everybody's lawn's brown except for yours. So it's the public shaming thing within a community of like, I know, well, there's no fine, so I'm just gonna keep doing it. And it's like,
Listen, we all love those sunny days, like you showed us the map that has like, we're very dry. We've had the best weather. We haven't had any rain. Like, we're all happy with this weather, but we're in a drought.
But clearly Sally doesn't own a farm like I do.
Water, but I wish I had a better way to.
I can't
to
believe-
know.
I can't believe how low our hay yield was this year, cause it was flipping rain. It's horrible.
I mean, that would, so, we don't
Meanwhile-
want it to get to a point where it becomes something that we can't fix, right? It has to become an emergency situation, that's all.
Which is the American way,
Which is what?
the American way. Like all the culverts in town that we need to replace because they're gonna get wiped out in the next flood, but it's like, yeah, but then it's the federal government will come in and pay you.
All right, don't go down that rabbit hole.
Maybe we just said that as an action item for one of our next meetings in a couple
How do
of
we create a better outreach?
months is, yeah, and have,
Patient.
Steve or someone else, no, but more like actually
Yeah.
tie actions
Yeah.
to the different drought levels
Difference that
plan.
Cyrus made with the fire safety signs, right? And like, you can easily ignore them. But people have seen them and people like, who ordinarily might not think of it are like, oh, it's a high fire hazard, right? I'm not saying we can do this, but to have like a digital sign in town that's connected to things like this, where everybody driving by is forced to see it. Especially with kids, it gets people talking about like, well, weren't you just watering the lawn all night last night, Dad? Like, yeah, I was. Well, that thing said you probably shouldn't be.
I mean, when you see the bans in the surrounding towns, it's common sense that it's affecting town as well, but
Yeah,
So I think the other problem we have is just like, where is our community going for that information? Are they coming to the town website? Are they?
We have the electronic signs that we use in the summer for the beach.
Yeah.
Beaches and stuff, and since beach season is
See.
over, we can repurpose those,
Yeah.
if need be.
But beach season is the time when, yeah.
But we're kind of where we are now,
Yeah, yeah.
Some of them.
But I wonder,
Signs rotate too.
Yeah.
Slow down,
so maybe it'd
use too much water.
be like,
Lessons for the day.
and then
Yeah.
messaging being different in different parts of the community, right?
Yeah.
Different availability.
I think, so, communicating it to the residents who are here, is
Yeah.
very important. Well, like, they're probably more important than the transient summer. As it is, I mean, you can still have a drought. No, one. Just getting people aware of it so that there is a culture, like you're talking about, the one green lawn, like,
Or the people who are renting in the summer, just to be like, hey,
yeah, hey.
tell your renters, please,
Yeah.
Well, people who have the cisterns do, because every time, there's a constant flow of cash to refilling and refilling, but you can't monitor. It comes down to, well.
It's a cultural change, like it's why California is. It is. I mean,
Yeah.
it's been-
Like that
and
forever.
You can do it. The school
Yeah.
that my kids went to was very environmentally oriented. They did a whole like it's like a year on water. And like, to the point that my like 8-year-old daughter would come in, I'd be like filling the sink to shave, and she would like turn the thing off.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not running it down the drain, but it's a thing, when.
It's the thing, you have to teach.
That's a really
I
good
find
avenue with
that all the
kids.
time when he's brushing his teeth.
But
Yeah.
when I taught school and we talked about plastic, this is like, we're talking 25 years ago, plastic bags and paper bags. I had more than one parent say to me, thanks, because they were using plastic bags that didn't break, and they would describe the paper bags. They just need the reusables. We weren't there yet, but I thought the kids were like taking it really to heart, and they,
Yeah.
and that's only what I got feedback on. I have no idea what I didn't hear about.
Yeah, so
This
I'm
slide,
gonna leave you guys with a couple of resources.
okay.
So, in addition to the US Trout Monitor, the Cornell, works with the Drought Monitor folks, and they make a comprehensive dashboard for drought, for the Northeast. And so this is consistent with the monitor, drought monitor. It's not really, loading, but you can look at, precipitation, based off 7-day, 30-day, 60-day, 3 month, 6 month, and 1 year. So it'll give you a map of the percent of normal. So you can see the changes going back to last week, back to a year. And like I said, we have a whole climate response network in Rhode Island that we manage. And so they look at the groundwater and stream flows. So this is a tool that I'm gonna leave you guys with so that you guys can monitor, regions of the state based off of the effects of precipitation. And so these are all real time. We can change here, real time 7-day averages up to 28. So as you can see, if you click on any of these, you can go to the actual USG site, the USGS site, and look at how, how low these gauges are, these stream flows, and whether they're in the 5% or 10% of normal. And so you can look at the intensity. And this is our,
What site is this now? This is all DEM site or?
this is a Cornell Northeast Dews, and I'll leave it on this laptop. And so obviously because of the shutdown, it might not be updated. But this is the Rhode Island DEM, which also pulls in the Rhode Island Drought Monitor. And here is the blurb that's updated once a week based off of our meeting and looking at the data. So you can see this on a weekly basis, change. So these are resources that you all can use, that are updated fairly quickly. The drought dashboard that I showed earlier is updated, once a month. That's for long-term drought. So if you want to look at weekly, you guys can be, in the now here. And this also shows, soil moisture maps. So we can look at the different depths of soil you can see the type of dryness. Those are all satellite based. And most importantly, you can look at some of the 1-day up to 7-day predictions. So as you can see, this weekend, it's looking like we're gonna get a good amount of rain, so that's what they're. Next week.
I'm gonna step out for a minute, but could you do me one favor before you go? Could you tell them about their backyard, that they know about how important that stream gauge is at Cronin that we've been talking about? It's like, nobody knows that. You drive by there all the time, you're like, yeah, whatever. You might not even know it's there, but how important it is,
Yeah,
how
so
lucky we are.
what Chris is, mentioning is a stream gauge, that measures the lower Wood-Pawcatuck. And so that has been historically used. I believe it's the longest running data set for stream gauges that we have in Rhode Island. It goes back like 80 something years. It's used a lot, to measure what the effects of water use in the surrounding area are. Because if you're pumping, doing a well test in the surrounding area, you might see influence on that gauge, as well as other wells that they set up for the projects to look at the changes for withdrawal rates for the impacts. This gauge is, like I said, it's on the lower Wood-Pawcatuck. And before we created this this extensive network of stream gauges, which we do in collaboration with USGS. It's a 3-year contract. It's about $250,000 for them to provide us this data and help us manage it. And that lower wood Pawcatuck gauge could be even used in most extreme situations to understand how the whole state is doing in terms of drought. So
Located.
it's this one.
Westerly?
And so I believe it was identified, that area was identified for fish passage improvement by CRMC, if I'm not mistaken. So you can see the precip there. And so at that location, you have a bridge. And so right past the bridge is a USGS booth that has all the equipment for that sensor that reaches under the water with a sensor. And what's special about that area is that there's a weir just past that little monitoring station. And that weir, if you all aren't familiar with what a weir is, just think of it as a speed bump in the river that creates water to elevate and pool, sort of like a mini dam, you can say, but it's mostly, unless the water is very low during drought conditions, usually you can't see it. And so what that weir does is that it pools the water behind it, and it creates stable conditions for this USGS sensor to be able to accurately calculate the stream flow. And so there has been a proposition to improve fish passage in that area. And so I believe what Chris shared with me was a proposal with multiple options to either remove the weir or to basically modify the weir by cutting a giant V shape in it. And so what that would do is removal or dropping that pool. What it would do is it would cause unstable conditions so that the sensor that goes from the monitoring booth underwater would no longer be consistent in collecting data, because what happens is there is a ratio in how the stream flow is calculated. It's calculated by the velocity of the water and I believe the pressure. And so has to be a direct correlation between the two to get a significant reading. And so any type of removal of that weir that would create the water to no longer pool and be stable in that section would basically create an inconsistency in that data. So it would remove the ability for us to continue to use that gauge. So the data would basically stop from that point, because let's say if it was removed, or even if there was just a V, like a notch cut in the middle to help fish, like swim up, let's say, especially during low flows, what would happen is that ratio would no longer be consistent that USGS gets from that data. And so what happens in that situation is USGS would either have to move that stream gauge, which once again would make it no longer continuous. So we would lose the continuity of that data. 2, if you make a notch and they keep it there, let's say, the data becomes inconsistent, and they would need at least 6 months to a year to validate the new way that data is being collected. And so that means that the data that's being collected now won't necessarily match up with previous data. So it would be a shame, one, because it's not only used for drought, but it's used for studies of hydrological studies of the area in terms of what's around it and how it's impacting it. And I've seen it used in plenty of consultant projects where they're building different independent wells in the area and things like that. So extremely useful data. Like I said, representative of the whole state even historically, and yeah, very, very far engaged, not just for Water Resources Board, but for EM, USGS, and things like that, farmers.
You went deeper in the
All
hole.
right, thank you.
Gauge there for the whole state relies on right in your backyard. If anybody ever wants, I'll take you up there.
It just went.
I think it's like the coolest spot that I know of in this entire area, because you've got like a ride-out road bridge, you've got a USGS stream gauge, you've got a turf farm that can suck as much water out of the river as it wants to, there's no limit. And you have United Nuclear's contaminated soil, all like, you can throw a rock and hit them all at the same time. So it's kind of a cool little
Tail.
social in our own backyard. And it's the dividing line between Richmond and Trostown.
Yeah, that's great.
Wish I didn't know that.
All right.
I have one last question. Sorry, guys.
Is this a for Hector question or?
Should try to wrap this
No.
up, Sarah.
This is an important one. Is what sort of studies have you guys been doing in terms of climate change impacts on water supply? Like, is there any information that you could share with us? And like, how are you contemplating climate projections in, say, field for these wells?
There is no, the state does not have a safe yield protocol. It's not, there is no one protocol because each supplier and source is so different. We do have guidelines. The Water Resources Board does provide safe yield guidelines. They're fairly general, but you know, it's looking at recharge if it's groundwater, understanding your effects, if you're surface water. There's a lot of guidance. What DEM uses for permitting of new wells, for example, they use the minimum depletion method, I believe. So they look at the lowest 7-day average of flow, whatever that is, and they use that number to determine what the safe yield is. So anything below that would not be acceptable.
But you're not looking at climate change.
So in terms of climate change, USGS and Providence Water have done a recent study to consider changes in climate and population to see what their full build out would look like. So they just finished that study, I believe, this year. Obviously that's for Providence and they had the money to do it. But that affects all nearby areas, all the surrounding areas of Providence, which has the highest population, so it makes sense why they did it. There isn't anything specific to look at changes. The large water suppliers themselves, they all have proprietary data. They have software that looks at their sources and they can see live their changes. So they're doing all that when they provide system water management plans to us. And so they have to do the safe yield and it has to be current. So they all do that. But we don't do it for private wells
They're not.
because we don't necessarily have, it's not easy to measure a large area because they're all, not that they're kind of fragmented. So if you were to do a study in one area, it's going to be only for that direct area. So it's kind of hard to be a capture-all. Like I said, Department of Health is who I would ask because they're the ones that deal with the small communities. So I'm not aware, but as a whole, I don't know, other than federal agency efforts, what state efforts exist.
So everything's looking at the past and nothing's looking.
Correct. Yeah, one of the things that I'm doing is I've been looking at the last 5 to 10 years in terms of trends. And so that's something that I started to work with with the climatologist at DEM. But that's like an internal project that we're trying to see how we can fit that in. Mostly to justify things to like Department of Transportation and also to justify the reservoirs is what I've looked into that.
It's been really educational. So much.
Thank you guys.
Great information. Yeah.
Probably owe you more.
Sarah, we don't have anything.
Cash it.
Yes, if you ever want to chat about that stuff, that's what I do in my day job. I do hydroclimatology and large water supply systems for internationally
Okay.
for like figuring out infrastructure planning. So,
Yeah,
Yes.
it is very complex,
and
especially when, depending on what scale you're looking at.
yeah, especially when there's no data.
I know. More money. More money.
In Angola.
Any other questions you guys have for me?
Thank you, Hector.
Thank you.
Yeah, very informative.
So much, yeah,
Very fun. You guys, something.
yeah, good time. And it's
welcome
okay for
today.
us to
Yeah.
post presentation, right?
Yes, feel free. Feel free.
Thank you, Is Victoria still back there?
Yeah, she's still hiding.
Thank you, Victoria.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Contact me if you guys have any more questions or have any Department of Health questions.
Okay.
I'll update them, and if you guys want to follow up, let me know. I can have them present.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Sorry for the barrage of. But
Good questions.
yeah, well, it's what I do. I can't turn it off. In my head. Like. So let's move on and see how much of this we can go through quickly.